Well, certainly it's my great pleasure to have a chance talking to you people and discuss with you.
Try to speak as loudly as you ever
Okay.
know how.
Okay, so
Use your outside voice.
So I don't have a feed. I'm very pleased to have a chance to discuss, this important issue with you, especially when I, look at your name. Quite a few names look familiar to me because through my reading your papers or listening to your talks and so forth. Okay, so section 2 is about hostile actions in space that might justify military actions. Now, certainly in 1 hour and 15 minutes, we cannot possibly to cover all space threats. So it would be nice if instead of touching all space threats, we can focus and study more deeply on the most recent and most serious threats. And I call the robotic threats from peaceful space surface spacecraft. There are 4 reasons why our group might want to focus our attention today on these robotic threats. First, Lieutenant General Robert Ashley, Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, who is the United States highest-ranking military intelligence officer, he said on June 26 last year that the U.S. lead in space is diminishing, and tomorrow's sky will be filled with enemy robotic satellites. In fact, last night, I noticed that Air Force just came out with a report talking about exactly the same thing. Now, if you want to know more, I can talk more about it later. But the bottom line is the space robotic threats will be with us by the early 2020s. That is to say, we only have a few years remaining to design, equip, and implement a deterrence and defense strategy to deal with these threats. The second reason that we might want to focus on this is that robotic threats could force the U.S. not to wage a war, which I talk about, because then would prevent us to intervene on one hand. But on the other hand, I'm sorry that kind of disagreeing with Bob on this point. And I think among all space threats, to me, is the robotic threat that are most likely leading to a space Pearl Harbor. I don't care what you call space Pearl Harbor. What I'm trying to say is that is the best way to describe a large number. Large number, it can be 5, it can be 10, but an intolerable number of satellites, at least during the next 10 years. Okay, that's what I'm trying to focus on. The other things we have more time.
Can you clarify? I'm sorry. The robotic on orbit.
Okay, so I try not to, but basically, when I say robotic threat, space robotic threat, I mean the threat from peaceful space surfacing spacecraft that Melissa talked about. They can to remove space debris and so forth. So I'm talking about a dual-use capability.
So
Physical interference in close proximity.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did everyone hear that? Okay.
Okay. So the third point is, this is a very important point to me. Although we are now at the 11th hour, we still cannot defend and deter against these serious robotic threats. I think people are ignoring it at this point. The fourth point, I think, is the most important point that I'm trying to make, is today and in the rest of 2019, I think our group, working together, can really make game-changing contribution in time to defeat these robotic threats, while most other people are still not focusing on this threat. They are talking about the threat, but they are not talking about how the solution to deal with it. So I'm talking about the solution that we don't have. So now let me give my thoughts to Henry's question for session 2 so that you can examine my arguments and offer solutions to these robotic threats. Okay, I'm trying to cut out some of the part that I already talked about. So the first point is currently, an adversary can legitimately place its robotic spacecraft arbitrarily close to any number of our critical satellites. And then upon further, of course we can see it, but I talked about that already. We can do nothing about it, so that's the problem. Unless we change the TCPM or the transparency, confidence thing, and also, more importantly, like George said, we need to do some military strategy. We cannot just depend on the guidelines, on the voluntary ones, or even the legally binding laws. We have to do both, okay? So that means that if they're already very close, then upon further command from our adversary, they can travel the less short distance to near simultaneously disable an intolerable number of our satellites, because we will not have enough warning time to set up our defense to protect our satellites. So I always said our current strategy is grossly inadequate to deal with these threats. Now we may know how to handle jamming and direct ascent and so forth, but in terms of this one, we really have nothing to deal with it. So I hope our group can examine the following 3 critical issues and offer suggestions in how to adjust DoD's law of war manual so as to represent the up-to-date legal views of the Department of Defense for executing the military operations. I mean, that's what we need to do. I mean, we need to put our input. I know that the Standing Committee is doing a lot of review of the law of war, so this would be a good one to do. So what are the 3 things that we need to do? First, an adversary's satellites, okay, they must be kept at a safe distance from our critical satellites. Our group can examine this issue and hopefully would conclude that keeping a safe distance from or creating a buffer or a cell zone like Melissa talked about in one of her meetings, that each of our critical satellite is justified. So we want this group to show that it's justified or not justified. Also, an adversary that sends its spacecraft into too many of our self-defense zones is the aggressor and the instigator of an armed conflict, including a major war. So second, once our self-defense zone have been penetrated, we should have the right of self-defense to protect our satellite even before the attacks have actually occurred. Now, President Trump's America's First National Space Strategy declared that we will counter threats. I hope our group can confirm that countering threats means that we can execute self-defense before imminent threats have turned into actual attacks. I know you people have a lot of discussion on that. The third one is Henry and I recommended to use of bodyguard satellites, bodyguard spacecraft to protect our critical satellites, because currently our satellites are unprotected against robotic attacks. Now, however, our proposal is overshadowed by a popular but dangerous strategy, which argues that a single doctrine is all we need to deter all kinds of space attacks, including robotic attacks. This one-size-fits-all doctrine proposed that to answer all attacks on our satellites, the U.S. should retaliate with attacks on not only the instigator space targets, but also the ground targets. So this dealing with what Henry asked, should we go into the other domain, and so forth. To me, such a reprisal, which expanded to involve ground targets, would unnecessarily escalate the conflict and unnecessarily killing soldiers and even innocent civilians. I hope our group would confirm that this one-size-fits-all doctrine would be far less desirable than just neutralizing the robotic attackers in space alone. Because this one-size-fits-all doctrine violates, like Joshua said, about the law of war manual. I think it violates, this attacking in other domains, would violate at least 3 of the 5 principles of the law of war manual: the proportionality, the humanity, and distinction. We can talk more about that. But so now finally, let me summarize Henry's question by translating his question into 3 specific and critical questions. First, do we need buffer zones? That's the first question. Second, can we exercise self-defense against imminent threats before attacks have actually occurred? Third, should we have bodyguard spacecraft? Currently we don't have spacecraft, so I don't know when those are laser stuff coming to us, what do we have to defend them? We don't. So those are the 3 things I hope that you can shed some light on. So now I think I'm ready.
Brian, you may at some point have to explain, because I'm not sure I
Okay.
understand,
Uh-huh.
what a bodyguard is.
Oh, bodyguard meaning that currently our satellites are not protected. If the Chinese put their satellite next to our satellite, what we use deterrence. Oh, we can attack something else and so forth and so forth. But it's not going to help because U.S. depend on satellites, so we need to somehow neutralize this threat. So effective defense is very important, and it's like I know Douglas would agree with me, that you need the defense to be able to do the deterrent. You can say, okay, we are now like playing soccer. Like we're playing soccer that we think we are so good, so offensive. We don't need a goalie. We don't have to defend our satellites. We don't have to do offside. I just watched my granddaughter to play the game.
You really need a satellite guard as opposed to a body.
Yeah, so we need a satellite to guard it. So
Satellite guard.
So the last point is the satellite to safeguard. The best one is to use our own robotic spacecraft to bodyguard our own satellite. So now you have robotic against robotic, so you don't have that much escalation, and then you can't prevent arms race. So that's another thing.